From the cliffs above Thermopylae, the sea looked black with ships. Tens of thousands of sails swallowed the horizon, stretching farther than the eye could follow. The greatest empire the world had ever known had arrived, and standing in its path were 300 men. Not an army, not a nation, 300. They knew they would not survive. They sharpened their weapons anyway, because if they failed here, if this narrow strip of earth fell, Europe would follow. What happened over the next 3 days would echo for centuries, shaping freedom, empire, and the very idea of resistance itself, and almost no one remembers how close it came to disappearing forever. Before we step into the dust and blood of ancient Greece, take a second to support deep history storytelling like this. If you enjoy long-form documentaries that feel like cinema, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, or what you do while listening. History is best shared, not watched alone. Now, let's go back to a world standing on the edge. The Persian Empire did not conquer the world with chaos. It conquered it with order. By the early 5th century BCE, Persia was not just an empire. It was a system so vast, so efficient, that resistance often collapsed before battles even began. Roads stitched continents together. Messengers crossed hundreds of miles in days. Local rulers were spared if they submitted. Taxes were predictable. Religions were tolerated. To many, Persian rule felt inevitable, even reasonable. From the Indus Valley to the edges of Egypt, from Anatolia to Central Asia, nations fell not because Persia was cruel, but because it was relentless. Every generation had known only one direction of history, outward. And now the empire's gaze had settled on Greece, not because Greece was rich, not because it was united, but because it was unfinished. The Persian kings viewed the world as something meant to be completed. Borders were not limits, they were invitations. When a land existed beyond imperial control, it represented disorder, an imbalance that demanded correction. And Greece was chaos incarnate, a scatter of quarreling city-states, endlessly at war with one another. No central authority, no unified army, no shared identity strong enough to resist pressure from within, let alone invasion from the greatest power on earth. From Persia's perspective, Greece was not a challenge. It was a formality. Years earlier, Persian forces had already tasted Greek blood. Cities along the coast of Asia Minor, Greek by culture, had rebelled against Persian rule. Athens had dared to support them. For the Persian king, this was not rebellion. It was insult. Empires could forgive defeat. They never forgave defiance. Darius the Fifth, the Persian king at the time, reportedly ordered a servant to whisper a reminder to him each day. "Master, remember the Athenians." But Darius died before he could finish what he started. His son would not. Xerxes inherited more than a throne. He inherited an empire that expected expansion as proof of legitimacy. To rule Persia, Persia was not to maintain, it was to advance. And Greece stood directly in the path of that expectation. Preparations for invasion took years. Bridges were built across the Hellespont. Supply depots were established months in advance. Historians still debate the exact size of Xerxes' army, but all agree on one thing: no force like it had ever moved toward Europe before. To the Greeks, the news arrived like thunder heard from beyond the mountains. Scouts spoke of numbers that felt mythical, soldiers without end, ships crowding the sea until water vanished beneath wood and sail. Fear spread faster than certainty. Some city-states surrendered immediately. Others argued submission was wiser than extinction. Many reasoned that resistance was madness. Heroic, perhaps, but futile. Athens debated endlessly. Sparta remained silent, and yet, beneath the terror, something else began to stir. A question no one wanted to ask out loud. What if this was the last moment anyone could say no? Because if Persia conquered Greece, it would not merely conquer land. It would absorb something fragile and unprecedented. A way of life built not on kings and decrees, but on debate, citizenship, and individual honor. The Greeks did not yet call it freedom, but they felt its weight. Still, feeling was not enough. To resist Persia required unity, and unity had never been Greece's strength. City distrusted city. Old grudges outweighed common danger. Alliances cracked before they formed, except in one place: Sparta. Unlike the rest of Greece, Sparta did not debate. It did not negotiate. It did not calculate survival. It prepared for death. Because Spartan society had been built on a single truth: life was temporary. Honor was eternal. And when messengers arrived describing an army so vast it would darken the sun with arrows, the Spartans did not ask how many. They asked where. That question would lead to a narrow strip of land squeezed between mountain and sea. A place where numbers meant nothing. A place where an empire would be forced to fight on human terms, and where 300 men would decide the fate of a continent. But before the battle, before the blood, before the legend, we must understand the land that stood divided, and why it nearly fell without a fight. Greece was not a nation. It was an argument. From the air, the land looked unified. Mountains folding into valleys, coastlines biting into the sea, islands scattered like stepping stones. But on the ground, every ridge marked a boundary, every river a dispute, every harbour a rivalry waiting to ignite. To be Greek did not mean loyalty to Greece. It meant loyalty to your city. Athens was not Sparta. Sparta was not Corinth. Corinth was not Thebes. Each had its own laws, gods, customs, and pride. They fought each other more often than they ever fought outsiders. War for them was not an emergency, it was tradition. This was the fatal weakness Persia saw immediately. An empire fights as one shell body. Greece fought as 1,000 clenched fists, swinging in different directions. Athens believed in debate, commerce, and the power of words. Its citizens argued policy in open air, believing truth emerged from conflict of ideas. They built ships, not walls, and trusted that cleverness could outmaneuver brute force. Sparta believed none of this. Sparta believed the world was hostile by default, and that only discipline preserved order. There were no debates in Sparta, no art to distract, no luxury to soften resolve. Boys were taken from their families at 7 and raised by the state. Weakness was corrected. Disobedience was erased. Where Athens celebrated the mind, Sparta worshipped endurance, and they despised each other for it. Between them stood dozens of other city-states, each calculating survival in its own way. Some saw Persia not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Submit early, they reasoned, and autonomy might be preserved. Align with the winning side, and old rivals could finally be crushed. Persia understood this instinct well. It did not demand cultural erasure. It demanded obedience. For many Greek leaders, that seemed a small price to pay. When Persian envoys arrived carrying earth and water, the symbols of submission, most cities handed them over without resistance. Some even welcomed them. Athens did not. In a moment of furious defiance, the Athenians threw the Persian envoys into a pit. The Spartans, equally blunt, threw theirs down a well. "Take earth and water from there," they said. It was not bravado. It was a declaration of inevitability. Because once you killed a Persian envoy, compromise ceased to exist. Still, defiance did not equal unity. Even as Persia prepared its invasion, Greek leaders argued about leadership, strategy, and responsibility. Who would command the allied forces? Who would defend which territories? Who would sacrifice first? And beneath every discussion lurked a darker fear. If one city weakened itself defending another, who would stop a rival from taking advantage later? History had trained them to mistrust each other more than any foreign power. This is what makes what happened next so improbable it borders on myth. Because unity did not emerge from shared values, it emerged from necessity. The oracle at Delphi, voice of the gods, was consulted. Its response was devastating. Athens, it warned, would fall. Its temples would burn. Only wooden walls might save its people. Many heard surrender in those words. A few heard ships. Athens chose the sea. Sparta faced a different kind of paralysis. Not fear, but faith. As Xerxes' army began its march, Sparta was bound by religious law. The Carneia festival forbade military action. To march before its completion would anger the gods. To delay would doom Greece. This was the moment where history nearly broke. Sparta could have chosen piety over survival. It had done so before. Many expected it to do so again. Instead, it chose something unprecedented, a symbolic force. Not an army, a statement. King Leonidas would march north with his personal guard, 300 Spartan warriors, while the main army waited. They would hold the line long enough for Greece to prepare. No one pretended this force could stop Persia. That was never the point. The point was time. Time for Athens to evacuate its people. Time for Greek fleets to organize. Time for reluctant city-states to decide whether Greece would exist tomorrow. Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, was chosen not because it guaranteed victory, but because it denied Persia its greatest advantage. Numbers. The pass was narrow. Mountains pressed in from one side, the sea from the other. In places, only a few men could stand abreast. Cavalry was useless. Massive formations collapsed into chaos. Here, discipline mattered more than size. Here, a few could face many, but only if they stood together. As Leonidas marched north, forces from other Greek cities joined him. Thespians, Thebans, allies who rarely agreed on anything, now bound by proximity to annihilation. It was not unity born of trust. It was unity born of no alternatives. Behind them lay cities arguing about politics. Ahead of them lay an empire that did not negotiate. The land itself seemed to understand what was coming. Hot sulfur springs steamed near the pass. Winds howled unpredictably through the mountains. Waves crashed endlessly against rock, as if rehearsing the sound of war. And somewhere across the horizon, Xerxes advanced, confident, methodical, unstoppable. To him, this resistance was a delay. To Greece, it was everything. Because if the line broke here, there would be no second chance. No regrouping. No retreat to safety. Only occupation. And yet, the men marching toward Thermopylae did not speak of survival. They spoke of duty, of holding, of standing long enough for the world to change behind them. At their center walked a king who had been prepared for this moment since childhood, a man shaped not to rule, but to die well. Leonidas did not believe he would win. He believed he would matter. And in the next chapter, we step inside the brutal system that forged him. A society that raised children to face death without flinching. And a king who understood that legacy was written not by those who lived longest, but by those who chose where to fall. Leonidas was never meant to be king. In Sparta, birth did not guarantee power. Survival did. Leonidas was the third son of King Anaxandridas II, far from the line of succession. No one expected history to remember his name. No one prepared him for a throne. They prepared him for something else. At the age of 7, Leonidas was taken from his mother and delivered to the Agoge, Sparta's state-controlled system of training. It was not an education. It was a filtration process. Boys were stripped of comfort, identity, and protection. They were taught hunger before reading, pain before philosophy. They slept on reeds, they cut themselves. They were given 1 cloak per year and beaten if caught stealing. Not for theft, but for being caught. The lesson was simple. Survival was a skill. Mercy was not guaranteed. Friendship existed, but it was conditional. Weakness was punished collectively. Strength was rewarded with responsibility. Every exercise, every trial, every humiliation pointed toward a single outcome: obedience under pressure. Sparta did not ask whether a boy wanted to be a warrior. It asked whether he deserved to remain alive. Leonidas endured all of it. He learned how to fight in formation before he learned how to fight alone. How to hold a shield not for himself, but for the man beside him. How to advance when fear screamed retreat. How to endure silence when injured. How to kill efficiently without spectacle. But more importantly, he learned something rarer. He learned restraint. Sparta's warriors were feared not because they were savage, but because they were controlled. Emotion was not erased, it was mastered. Anger was a tool. Fear was a signal. Pain was information. Leonidas did not stand out as the strongest or fastest. He stood out as reliable, the man who did not panic, the man who held formation when others wavered. Years passed. Brothers died. The unexpected happened. One by one, the men ahead of Leonidas in the line of succession disappeared, through illness, misfortune, or fate. When the crown finally reached him, it was not triumph that marked the moment. It was acceptance, because Leonidas understood something many kings never did. In Sparta, a crown was not power. It was obligation. The king was expected to lead from the front, to eat what his soldiers ate, to bleed when they bled, to die when retreat was possible, but dishonor was not. When Persia began its march, Leonidas was already an old man by Spartan standards. He had a wife, a son, a legacy that could have ended quietly. Instead, he chose visibility. When the council debated how many soldiers to send, Leonidas knew the truth before anyone said it aloud. A full Spartan army marching north would expose the Peloponnese. It would provoke rivals. It would violate sacred law. Sending nothing would doom Greece. So he chose symbolism over safety. He selected 300 men, each with a living son. Not out of cruelty, but continuity. Their bloodlines would not end with them. Sparta would endure, even if they did not. These were not conscripts. They were the best Sparta had to offer. Veterans, leaders, men who had survived decades of war and training. Men who understood exactly what this mission meant, and volunteered anyway. When they marched, there were no speeches, no promises of return, no illusion of rescue. Spartan mothers were famous for their parting words: "Come back with your shield, or on it." Leonidas did not dramatize the journey. He did not rally his men with visions of glory. He reminded them of the law. Hold the line. Do not break formation. Do not retreat. Because at Thermopylae, retreat would mean collapse. not just of a battle, but of a future. As they approached the pass, Leonidas reportedly paused. He surveyed the terrain carefully. He asked questions about the road, the sea, the mountains. He did not see a trap. He saw an opportunity. The hot gates narrowed the world. It compressed chaos into predictability. It reduced the empire's strength to a sequence of bodies that could be met one at a time. But Leonidas also knew the truth others ignored. No position is unbreakable. Somewhere in those mountains, there would be a path. A weakness, a human choice that could undo everything. He did not plan to survive that moment. He planned to meet it standing. Before the battle began, Persian scouts observed the Spartans preparing, not with fear, but with calm routine. Men combed their hair, oiled their bodies, practiced movements slowly, deliberately. Xerxes laughed when told. He believed they were ignorant of what awaited them. Leonidas was not ignorant. He was precise. When a Persian messenger arrived, demanding surrender and threatening annihilation, Leonidas listened patiently. Then he replied with 2 words that would outlive empires. Molon labe. Come and take them. It was not defiance. It was fact. Because Leonidas did not believe in miracles. He believed in delay, in sacrifice, in the idea that standing still, at the right moment, could redirect the future. Behind him stood men raised to die well. Ahead of him stood an empire unused to resistance, and between them lay a narrow road where history would be forced to choose. In the next chapter, we step into that place. The sulphurous wind, the stone walls, the sea pressed hard against land. And watch as the world's largest army arrives at a pass too small to remember its own size. Thermopylae did not look like a battlefield. It looked like a mistake. A thin ribbon of land squeezed between steep, broken mountains and a restless sea. It felt less like a gateway and more like a bottleneck. An inconvenient pause in the road north. Steam rose from sulfur springs nearby, giving the place its name, the Hot Gates. The air carried a metallic tang, sharp and unsettling, as if the land itself had already been wounded. This was where Leonidas chose to stand, not because it was glorious, because it was limiting. In warfare, space is power. At Thermopylae, space was stripped away. The road narrowed so tightly that at certain points, no more than a few men could fight side by side. Formation mattered more than speed. Discipline mattered more than numbers. The Persian army arrived in stages. First came scouts, then engineers. Then the endless flow of soldiers, armor flashing, banners rippling, dust rising in choking clouds. For days, the sound of marching never ceased. Drums echoed off the mountains. Horses screamed. Metal clashed. The earth shook under the weight of it. Greek allies watched from the walls in disbelief. Some had never seen more than a few thousand soldiers assembled at once. Now they watched tens of thousands arrive, and still more kept coming. And yet, Leonidas did not move. He fortified what little there was to fortify. An old stone wall was repaired. Positions were measured carefully. The sea lapped close enough that a misstep could mean drowning in armor. Behind him stood barely 7,000 Greeks. In front of him stood the weight of the known world. Xerxes himself arrived last, carried high on a golden throne so he could observe the pass. From his vantage point, the Greek position looked absurd, a handful of men blocking an imperial road. He waited. For 4 days he waited. Not out of caution, but expectation. No one resisted Persia once the king arrived in person. Cities crumbled at the sight of him. Armies fled before his banners fully unfurled. Resistance, when it occurred, ended quickly. Xerxes believed the Greeks would do what reason demanded. They would leave. When they did not, he sent messengers again. Promises of wealth, titles, power beyond imagining. Leonidas could rule Greece under Persian authority. His men could live. The offer was genuine. Leonidas refused. The delay confused the Persian command. Some argued the Greeks were stalling for reinforcements. Others believed they were unaware of the army's size. Xerxes chose patience, then humiliation. He ordered his archers forward. The plan was simple. Overwhelm the Greeks with missile fire. Break their will before contact. Show them resistance was pointless. When the arrows came, they came like weather, a darkening of the sky, a whisper that became a roar. The Greeks raised their shields and waited. Spartan training had prepared them for this. They did not scatter. They did not charge. They closed ranks and absorbed the storm. Arrows splintered against bronze. Some found gaps, men fell, but the line held. Xerxes was told the Spartans joked as the arrows fell, that they would fight in the shade. He did not laugh, because jokes are a form of confidence, and confidence was not supposed to exist here. The Persian king gave the order for a ground assault. Wave after wave advanced into the pass. Medes first, then Scythians, then soldiers from across the empire, each believing numbers would carry the day. They hit the Greek line like water against stone. The Spartans did not rush forward. They did not chase kills. They advanced and retreated in controlled movements, rotating the front ranks so no man grew too tired to fight. When a spear broke, another replaced it. When a man fell, another stepped into place. The Persians fought bravely, but bravery collapsed in the narrow pass. Their shorter spears struggled to reach beyond the Spartan shields. Their formations broke under pressure. Panic spread backward, clogging the road with fear and bodies. Men were pushed into the sea. Others were crushed by those behind them. Xerxes watched as his soldiers died in numbers he had never witnessed, without progress, without breakthrough. He ordered elite units forward. They failed too. Thermopylae had turned the empire's greatest strength into a weakness. Each additional soldier only increased the chaos. Commands were lost, signals misunderstood, officers trampled. The Greeks, fighting in smaller coordinated groups, controlled the rhythm of battle. By the end of the first day, the ground was slick with blood. The sea churned with bodies. The air stank of iron and decay. And still, the Greek line stood. That night, the Persian camp was silent. Not from grief, but disbelief. This was not how conquest worked. This was not how history behaved. Somewhere in the mountains above, a man watched. His name was Ephialtes. He knew the land. He knew a path. Narrow, winding, overlooked. That could lead Persian troops behind the Greek position. A way around the wall. A way to undo everything. By dawn, he would make his choice. And Leonidas, standing at the hot gates, would sense the shift. Not through scouts or messengers, but through the quiet realization every soldier knows when time is running out. Because Thermopylae was never meant to be held forever. It was meant to be paid for, and the price would be demanded at sunrise. In the next chapter, the battle intensifies, and the myth of Persian invincibility begins to crack as the immortals enter the pass. Dawn at Thermopylae arrived without ceremony. No horns sounded, no speeches were given. The light crept slowly over the mountains, revealing what the night had hidden. Bodies tangled in unnatural shapes, broken spears half buried in sand, shields dented beyond recognition. The sea carried debris back and forth, as if undecided about keeping it. The Greeks stood where they had slept. They had not withdrawn. They had not retreated to tend wounds. They had not celebrated. They simply waited. Across the pass, the Persian army stirred. Word of the previous day's failure had spread through the ranks, reshaping confidence into tension. Soldiers adjusted armor more tightly. Officers barked sharper commands. No one laughed. Xerxes was already awake. He ordered a renewed assault, larger and more aggressive than before. This time, he would not test the Greeks, he would erase them. The advance began with noise, drums pounding, voices shouting in dozens of languages. The sound echoed between the cliffs until it felt inescapable, like the land itself was screaming. The Greeks answered with silence. When the Persians reached the choke point, the Spartans surged forward, not in a wild charge, but in a precise push, shields locked, spears angled. The movement was so coordinated, it looked rehearsed, like a single organism flexing. The first clash was brutal. Persian shields splintered under the weight of the impact. Men stumbled. Formation collapsed. Those behind pushed forward blindly, unaware the front had already broken. This was the moment that shattered an illusion. Persia had conquered by momentum, by convincing enemies that resistance was pointless. But here, resistance did not crumble. It sharpened. Xerxes watched as his soldiers died in close quarters, unable to bring their numbers to bear. The pass neutralized cavalry. Archers could not fire without hitting their own men. The road became a trap, and the Greeks exploited it mercilessly. They used feigned retreats, drawing Persian soldiers forward, then snapping back into formation. Crushing the disordered mass, they rotated fighters seamlessly. No man fought until exhaustion. No gap stayed open long enough to matter. Every movement had been drilled since childhood. The Persians fought bravely. But bravery without coordination is noise. It spends lives quickly and gains nothing. By mid-morning, the ground was unrecognizable. Bodies piled against the Spartan shields. Blood turned dust into mud. The smell became overwhelming. Sweat, iron, fear. Men gagged as they fought. Still, the line held. Xerxes grew furious. He ordered his most feared unit forward, the Immortals. 10,000 strong, elite infantry trained for shock and intimidation. Their name was no metaphor. When one fell, another immediately replaced him, maintaining the illusion of endlessness. They wore scale armor, carried wicker shields, and advanced with deliberate menace. Across the empire, their arrival meant annihilation. At Thermopylae, it meant disappointment. The Immortals moved with discipline, but not the kind the Spartans understood. Their spears were shorter, their shields lighter, their armor designed for mobility, not collision. When they met the Greek line, the outcome was immediate and devastating. Spartan spears punched through wicker shields. Bronze armor turned Persian blades aside. The Immortals pushed, but could not break through. Their ranks thinned as quickly as they advanced. Xerxes stood from his throne. Accounts say he leapt up in disbelief 3 times as the Immortals failed. For the first time, the King of Kings witnessed his elite forces being driven back. Not delayed, driven. The psychological impact rippled outward. Persian officers hesitated. Soldiers faltered. Confidence, once automatic, now had to be summoned. By afternoon, the attacks slowed. Xerxes had lost thousands. Leonidas had lost far fewer. But Leonidas knew something the Persians did not. Victory here was an illusion. Even as his men fought flawlessly, time was draining away. Spears broke faster. Arms tired. Wounds accumulated. Supplies dwindled. And somewhere beyond the mountains, Ephialtes was walking a path that would undo the geometry of the battlefield. Leonidas began adjusting the line subtly, pulling forces back slightly, tightening formation, conserving strength. He did not share his concerns. Spartan leadership did not rely on reassurance. It relied on trust. That night, fires burned low on both sides. The Persian camp buzzed with rumors. Some claimed the Greeks were demons. Others whispered they were already dead men, standing out of ignorance. The Greeks ate in silence. Leonidas walked among them, exchanging brief words, checking equipment, meeting eyes. No speeches, no promises, only presence. By then, he knew. The end was approaching. Not because of Persian strength, but because of human weakness. And when dawn came again, it would not be arrows or immortals that decided the fate of Thermopylae. It would be betrayal. In the next chapter, a single choice opens a path through the mountains and turns a heroic stand into a final sacrifice. Before the sun crested the ridgeline, the mountains betrayed the Greeks. Ephialtes moved quickly, driven not by loyalty to Persia, but by something smaller and more dangerous: resentment. He knew the path the locals used to move goats and timber through the hills. Narrow, twisting, easy to miss. It had protected Thermopylae for generations. Now it would end it. Persian scouts followed him in silence. No banners, no drums. Only the sound of feet scraping stone and breath held tight against the cold air. The immortals climbed through the night, armored men sweating beneath weight that suddenly felt heavier with every step. By the time Greek sentries spotted them, it was already too late. A small Phocian force had been assigned to guard the mountain path, never expecting a full assault. When arrows fell from the darkness, panic followed. They retreated upward, abandoning the route. The pass was open. Word reached Leonidas as the sky lightened. There was no confusion, no disbelief, only confirmation. He had always known this moment would come. Leonidas gathered the allied commanders. He did not ask for votes. He did not dramatize the choice. He stated facts. The Persians would attack from both front and rear. The pass could not be held. Those who stayed would die. Those who left could still fight elsewhere. Some Greeks departed immediately. Others hesitated, torn between survival and shame. The Thespians refused to go. The Thebans remained, some by loyalty, some by compulsion. Leonidas dismissed the rest. This is where legend simplifies, but reality is more powerful. There was no panic, no collapse of morale, no last-minute miracles, only clarity. Leonidas sent messengers south to warn Greece. He ordered the remaining men to eat, to rest, to prepare for close combat without hope of relief. The Spartans did not need encouragement. They sharpened broken spears into stabbing points. They adjusted armor. They joked quietly, not out of denial, but release. Laughter, in Sparta, was how fear exited the body. Leonidas spoke briefly to his men. Not about glory, not about history, but about obedience. Hold the line as long as possible. Kill as many as possible. Die standing. The final Persian assault began mid-morning. This time, the Greeks advanced farther into the pass, away from the wall into wider ground. It was deliberate. If they were going to die, they would take space with them. The clash was ferocious. Without the protection of the narrowest point, the Greeks faced pressure from all sides. Persian arrows found targets more easily. Spears shattered. Men fought with swords, then daggers, then bare hands. Leonidas fought at the front, not as a symbol, but as a Spartan. Accounts describe him breaking multiple weapons, killing officers, being wounded repeatedly. He did not retreat. He did not command from safety. At some point, he fell. The reason is lost. An arrow, a blade, exhaustion. What matters is what happened next. The Spartans surged forward to recover his body. Not out of sentiment, out of law. A fallen king could not be left to the enemy. They fought over him with a violence that shocked even the Persians. 4 times, the Persians pushed them back. 4 times, the Spartans reclaimed him. The ground around Leonidas became a killing field. Soaked so deeply, it turned slick beneath armored feet. The immortals pressed in, and they bled. Their reputation shattered in close combat. They died like all men, terrified, confused, trapped. Replacement after replacement fell into the grinder. Eventually, numbers won. The Greeks retreated to a small hill, surrounded on all sides. Broken weapons littered the ground. Shields were gone. Armor hung loose. Blood blurred vision. And still, they fought. When swords broke, they used fists. When arms failed, they used teeth. The Persians kept their distance now, unwilling to approach the circle. So they ended it the only way they could, with arrows. The sky darkened again. This time, the Greeks did not raise shields. They stood. When it ended, silence returned to Thermopylae, heavy, suffocating. Xerxes ordered the bodies searched. Leonidas's head was cut off, his body crucified. An act of rage, not strategy. The King of Kings had won. And yet, as the Persian army marched south, something had changed. They no longer believed themselves invincible. They had seen discipline defeat numbers. They had learned fear, and Greece had been given time. In the next chapter, we follow the ripples outward, how this defeat ignited resistance, hardened resolve, and set traps that Persia would walk into again and again. News of Thermopylae did not arrive in Greece as tragedy. It arrived as fire. Messengers ran the roads south, carrying a story no one expected to hear, that Persia had been held, that the greatest army on earth had been delayed by a few thousand men, that Spartans had stood, not fled, that the immortals had bled, and that Leonidas was dead. In Athens, the reaction was not despair, it was urgency. The delay had brought exactly what Leonidas intended. Time. Time to evacuate the city. Time to finish the fleet. Time to transform prophecy into strategy. Families packed what they could carry. Sacred objects were moved. The city was emptied with brutal efficiency. Athens would not be defended on land, it would be defended on water. Themistocles, already controversial, now became essential. His insistence on naval power had seemed reckless. Now it was salvation. Triremes were launched. Crews assembled. The Athenian fleet became the backbone of Greek resistance. Thermopylae had made one thing unmistakably clear. Persia could be fought. Meanwhile, Xerxes advanced into a land that refused to behave as expected. Cities were abandoned, supplies vanished, resistance stiffened. Instead of surrender, he found defiance shaped by example. The Spartans had redefined loss. In Persian ideology, defeat was total or irrelevant. In Greek memory, Thermopylae became something else, a demonstration that sacrifice could shift the future. And the Persians felt it. At Artemisium, Greek fleets engaged Persian ships in brutal, indecisive clashes. Losses mounted on both sides. Storms destroyed Persian vessels. Coordination faltered. The myth of unstoppable progress began to unravel. Then came Salamis. Trapped in narrow waters, Persia's vast navy became its own enemy. Greek ships, lighter, faster, better commanded, turned chaos into opportunity. Xerxes watched from a throne as his fleet shattered, destroyed not by lack of courage, but by excess. Too many ships, too much confidence, too little restraint. The lesson of Thermopylae repeated itself. Numbers without control were meaningless. By the time Persian forces retreated, the war had reversed. At Plataea, Greek hoplites, now united, now confident, met the Persian army head-on and broke it. Persia would never threaten Greece the same way again, and all of it traced back to 3 days at a forgotten pass. Thermopylae did not save Greece by winning. It saved Greece by teaching it how to resist. It taught Athens that sacrifice could be strategic. It taught Sparta that unity mattered beyond ritual. It taught smaller city-states that defiance was not suicide. Most importantly, it taught Europe something it would forget and relearn for centuries. Power is not decided solely by size. It is decided by belief. Leonidas never lived to see this. His body was mutilated, his name mocked by enemies. But his example spread faster than any army. Years later, Sparta would recover his remains. Monuments would rise, epitaphs would be carved. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Not as a boast, as an instruction. Thermopylae became a story told to children, soldiers, statesmen. It entered memory not as a stand of despair, but of deliberate choice. 300 did not save Europe by killing an empire. They saved it by proving one could say no, and mean it. In the final chapter, we step back from the battlefield and ask the question that lingers across centuries. Why does this moment still matter? Long after the blood dried at Thermopylae, long after the bones were buried or scattered, something remained, intangible, stubborn, and impossible to conquer. An idea had survived. Empires are accustomed to erasing enemies. They burn cities, rewrite borders, replace leaders. But ideas do not stand in formation. They do not retreat when outnumbered. They slip through cracks history forgets to seal. Thermopylae became one of those cracks. In the years that followed, Greece changed. Not suddenly, not cleanly, but irreversibly. Before the Persian Wars, Greek identity had been narrow and local. You were Spartan or Athenian, Corinthian or Theban. After Thermopylae, something broader began to form. Fragile, inconsistent, but real. A sense that some things were worth defending together. This did not mean Greece became peaceful. Far from it. City-states would return to fighting one another with renewed bitterness. Alliances would fracture. Wars would multiply. But the memory of Thermopylae never vanished. When Greek soldiers later stood in hopeless positions, they invoked Leonidas. When generals argued over retreat or resistance, Thermopylae hovered in the background. Not as a command, but as a question. Is this a moment that must be held because Thermopylae reframed failure? In most ancient cultures, defeat erased meaning. A lost battle was shame. A fallen king was weakness. A destroyed army was proof of divine disfavor. The Spartans rejected that logic. They argued something radical. That intention mattered as much as outcome. That obedience to law could outweigh survival. That dying in the right place could achieve what living elsewhere could not. This idea quietly reshaped Western thinking. Centuries later, Roman writers would obsess over Thermopylae, not because Rome admired Sparta's politics. It didn't. But because Rome recognized the power of disciplined sacrifice. Roman legions studied the phalanx. Roman philosophers debated the meaning of Leonidas's choice. Even Rome's enemies borrowed the lesson. Stand where terrain favors you. Deny the enemy their strengths. Force power to fight on your terms. Thermopylae became shorthand for resistance against overwhelming odds, not because it was unique, but because it was clear. No ambiguity, no reversal of fortune, no sudden miracle, just a line held until it broke. As centuries passed, the story traveled farther than the pass itself ever could. Medieval scholars copied Herodotus. Renaissance thinkers revived Greek ideals. Enlightenment philosophers looked backward to understand liberty, citizenship, and duty. And there, standing in the background of their arguments, was a Spartan king who refused to move. The story was simplified, romanticized, sometimes abused, but it endured. Modern soldiers have studied Thermopylae in military academies, not to glorify death, but to understand delay, terrain, morale, and the psychological dimension of war. The lesson is not fight until you die. The lesson is decide what must not fall. Thermopylae also carries a warning. Heroism is not scalable. What worked for Leonidas cannot be repeated endlessly without becoming meaningless. Sacrifice must be chosen carefully, not worshipped blindly. Even the Spartans understood this. Thermopylae was an exception, not a template. And yet, when moments arise that feel final, when retreat seems easier, safer, more rational, people still reach for this story, because it answers a fear we all recognize. The fear that resistance is pointless. Thermopylae says otherwise. It says resistance can fail tactically and succeed strategically. That a stand can matter even when it ends in silence. That history does not always belong to the survivors. Xerxes returned to Persia with scars invisible to his court. His empire remained vast, but the illusion of inevitability was gone. Within generations, Persia would fracture. Greece, fractured as it was, would go on to produce ideas, systems, and conflicts that shaped continents. None of that was guaranteed at Thermopylae. It was purchased, with time, with bodies, with a decision to hold when leaving was easier. 3 days. That was all it took to bend history, not by force, but by example. And that is why, when we say Thermopylae saved Europe, we are not speaking metaphorically. We are acknowledging that civilization does not advance only through victories. Sometimes it advances through lines drawn in dust, and men who refuse to step back from them. When the smoke cleared from the Persian wars, Greece did not emerge peaceful. It emerged awake. The victory over Persia did not create unity. It revealed potential. For the first time, Greek city-states had seen what coordination could achieve. They had felt the power of shared purpose, even if briefly. And like all glimpses of power, it was impossible to forget. Athens rose first. With its navy intact and prestige earned at Salamis, Athens positioned itself as protector of the Aegean. What began as a defensive alliance, the Delian League, slowly transformed into an empire in its own right. Tribute flowed in, walls rose, art, philosophy, and architecture flourished. Democracy deepened, not because it was gentle, but because it had been tested under existential threat. Citizens who had fought or fled together now debated together. Freedom became something earned, not assumed. Sparta watched all of this with suspicion. Thermopylae had not made Sparta expansive. It had made it cautious. The Spartans remained inward-looking, rigid, convinced that stability mattered more than brilliance. Their power lay in land armies, discipline, and fear. Two models of Greek greatness now stood opposed. And the irony is sharp. The sacrifice that saved Greece from Persia also ensured Greece would soon fight itself. The Peloponnesian War consumed the generation that followed. City-states turned the lessons of Thermopylae inward, using terrain, discipline, and delay against fellow Greeks. The unity forged by invasion shattered under ambition. Yet even in civil war, the Persian threat lingered as memory. No Greek state ever again treated foreign domination lightly. Beyond Greece, the ripple widened. Macedon learned from Greek warfare, adapting discipline into flexibility. Philip II studied the phalanx and improved it. His son, Alexander, would later carry Greek military principles eastward, into Persia itself. When Alexander crossed into Asia, he did not see Xerxes' empire as invincible. He saw it as beatable. That confidence did not emerge from nowhere. It was inherited. The psychological barrier broken at Thermopylae, never fully repaired. Alexander's conquest would spread Greek language, culture, and thought across continents. An echo of resistance transformed into expansion. The ideas preserved by delaying Persia now flowed outward in ways Leonidas could never have imagined. Philosophy, science, political theory, art. All fragile things, easily extinguished if Greece had fallen quickly and quietly. Instead, they endured. Rome would later absorb Greece militarily, but intellectually, Rome surrendered. Greek teachers educated Roman elites. Greek texts shaped Roman law. Greek ideas became the backbone of Western civilization. Thermopylae sat at the beginning of that chain, not as a cause, but as a hinge. A moment where one outcome closed and another became possible. This is how history often works. Not in grand victories, but in narrow escapes. In seconds stretched into days. In people who buy time with their lives so others can decide what to do with it. Leonidas did not build an empire, but without his stand, others might never have had the chance. And this raises the final question, the one that matters more than numbers, armies, or kings. Why do we still tell this story? Not as ancient trivia, not as romantic tragedy, but as something that refuses to stay buried, because Thermopylae is not about Spartans, it is about choice. And in the final chapter, we return to that choice and ask what it demands of those who remember it. Strip away the armor, the banners, the names carved into stone, and Thermopylae becomes something uncomfortably simple. A decision, not made in a moment of rage or desperation or blind faith, but in clarity. Leonidas knew he would lose. The Spartans knew they would die. Greece knew it was not ready, and yet the line was drawn anyway. History often flatters inevitability. We like to believe outcomes were destined, that civilizations rise because they must, and fall because they deserve to. Thermopylae shatters that comfort. Nothing about survival was guaranteed. Had Leonidas retreated earlier, Persia would have advanced unopposed. Athens might not have evacuated in time. The fleet might not have formed. Greek resistance might have collapsed into submission city by city. Europe, as we understand it, would have been shaped by a different hand. Centralized authority, divine kingship, obedience enforced by scale. Instead, what endured was messy, argumentative, fragile, and free. Not because it was stronger, because it was protected long enough to mature. 3 days, that is all the Spartans bought. But 3 days can change everything. Thermopylae reminds us that history is not moved only by winners. It is moved by those who decide when retreat becomes surrender, by those who understand that some positions cannot be abandoned without losing something greater than territory. The Spartans did not die for glory, they died for time. And time, once given, is dangerous. It allows ideas to spread, alliances to form, courage to infect the hesitant. Xerxes returned home having conquered land, but lost something far more valuable: inevitability. His empire would endure, but it would never again feel unstoppable. The Greeks carried the opposite lesson forward. That power could be resisted. That discipline could defeat scale. That unity, even temporary, could change the future. This is why Thermopylae survives in memory, not because 300 fought thousands, but because they understood exactly what they were doing. They were not trying to win a battle. They were trying to save a possibility. Every generation faces its own Thermopylae, moments where compromise is easier, where delay feels pointless, where standing firm invites loss. Most pass unnoticed. Some define eras. The men at the hot gates did not ask whether history would remember them. They asked whether Greece would exist long enough to write its own story. It did, and so do we. Because sometimes, civilization is not preserved by those who live to see the future, but by those who choose where to fall so others can reach it.